I raised my son with calloused hands, hands that built barns, hands that buried his mother, hands that paid every bill with sweat, not lies. Michael forgot those hands. He thought I was too old, too soft, too blind to see the knife in his smile. One night, he came begging, voice shaking, eyes wet. "Dad, I need you to save me. Just this once." He thought I'd sign a paper, pay his debt, protect him like I always had. But I didn't sign his rescue. I signed his erasure. That night, my pen became my weapon. Revenge isn't always fire. It isn't fists. It isn't blood in the dirt. Sometimes revenge is ink. One stroke across a name. One silence after a plea. That silence burned louder than any scream. He tried to trick me, but I built my life on truth, and truth is heavier than blood. If you've ever been betrayed, you know this weight. The silence of a broken bond. The sting of a son turning predator. This isn't a story about money. It's a story about blood, about justice, about a father who chose principle over pity. And if you've ever been betrayed, stay with me, because this story might be your story too. And if you believe in justice, subscribe, because I've got more stories the world tried to bury. My name is Thomas Reed, 70 years old, born and raised in the fields of Nebraska. I wasn't a rich man, never wore gold on my hands, but these hands, they carried tools, mended fences, buried seeds, and they buried my wife when cancer took her too early. This land shaped me. Hard winters, hot summers, neighbors who waved from tractors but never carried your load. Out here, a man survives on sweat, on calloused palms, on keeping his word. I taught my only son, Michael, the same. Honesty first, work before pleasure, pay your debts before they own you. I built this house with my back, the barn with my blood, every plank, every nail, a promise that Michael would never grow hungry. After his mother passed, it was just me and him, a father and a boy in a wooden farmhouse, watching storms roll across the cornfields. I thought grief would bind us. Instead, it left cracks. Michael wanted more than dirt, more than sweat, more than the truth could ever give. I looked at him sometimes and wondered, did he ever see me as more than an old man? Or just a wallet with a beating heart? Out here in Nebraska, you learn one thing. Your blood can betray you faster than a stranger. And when that day came for me, I was ready. Michael Reed, my only son, 40 years old, but still chasing shortcuts like a restless boy. He left the farm years ago, said Nebraska was too small, said dirt and sweat were for men with no ambition. He moved to Omaha, tall buildings, fast cars, bars that stayed open past midnight, the kind of city where a man can disappear in neon and excuses. Michael wasn't a farmer. He wasn't a builder. He was a gambler dressed in a suit. He called it investing, but I knew better. When money moves faster than hands can work, it's just another roll of dice. I'd drive to the city sometimes, catch a glimpse of him at a restaurant, laughing too loud, wine glass in hand, surrounded by people who wanted his company as long as the bill had his name. He never waved when he saw me, maybe ashamed of the boots on my feet, or maybe afraid I'd see the truth in his eyes. He called me old man more than dad, and every time he said it, something cracked a little deeper. Still, he was my blood. The boy I carried on my shoulders through cornfields. The boy who once cried when he lost his dog. That's the thing about betrayal. It doesn't come from enemies. It comes from the ones you once tucked into bed. For years, it was just me and Michael. A father and his boy in a wooden farmhouse outside Lincoln, Nebraska. We ate at the same table, prayed at the same church, worked the same land, at least in the beginning. When his mother died, I thought grief would bind us. I thought we'd become inseparable, two men standing against the storms. But grief doesn't always glue. Sometimes it cracks. I gave him my time, my stories, my discipline. He gave me silence, long hours locked in his room, eyes that looked past me toward a horizon I couldn't reach. He wanted more than soil, more than tractors and barns. He wanted neon. He wanted glass towers. He wanted a life I never trusted. Still, I paid his tuition, bought him his first car, watched him drive away to the University of Nebraska with pride in my chest and worry in my gut. And every year that passed, the calls grew shorter, the visits fewer, the laughter rarer. I'd see him on holidays, suit too sharp for a farm table, eyes darting at his phone more than at my face. Yet, I held on. Because a father hopes. Because blood is blind longer than it should be. I told myself, he'll come back. He'll remember these fields. He'll remember me. But the truth, Michael never looked back. And one day, he'd prove just how far a son can fall from his father. It started with an envelope, plain, unmarked, dropped through my mailbox on a quiet Nebraska morning. I almost tossed it with the junk mail, but the name on the letter, Michael Reed, pulled me still. Inside was no birthday card, no holiday greeting, just numbers, big numbers, debt. A loan in his name, a loan he swore never existed, a loan backed by collateral that chilled my blood, my land, my farm, my legacy. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the paper. The coffee turned cold in my hand. My heart pounded like the tractors once did in the fields. Why would Michael put my land on the line? Why would my son risk everything I built? I called him. Straight to voicemail. I called again. No answer. Hours later, he finally called back. Voice smooth, too smooth. Dad, don't worry. It's just business. Paperwork mix-up. I'll fix it. But I knew that tone. I'd heard it when he was a boy, hiding broken glass behind his back, a lie wrapped in calm. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the porch, letter in hand, staring at the fields under the moonlight, the same fields my father left me, the same fields I'd sworn would pass to Michael one day. And for the first time, a thought crept in. Maybe they shouldn't. The next morning, I drove to Omaha. 3 hours of highway, cornfields fading into concrete, silence louder than the radio. I held that envelope tight in the passenger seat. Every mile made the numbers on that page feel heavier. By the time I reached the city, my jaw was locked. My hands that once built barns, gripped the steering wheel like it was the only thing holding me steady. I found Michael at a place he said he never went. A bar with glass doors, neon lights, and whiskey more expensive than a month's groceries. Through the window, I saw him, laughing, louder than he ever laughed at our farm table, wine glass in hand, his jacket sharp, smile sharper. Around him sat friends, if you could call them that, faces that leaned in close, hungry not for his company, but for his wallet. I stepped inside, the smell of liquor, the sting of perfume, the thud of music that had no soul. Michael! My voice cut through the noise. He froze for a second, then smiled. Too fast. Too fake. Dad, what are you doing here? I held up the envelope. His eyes flicked down, then away. That flicker told me more than words. It's nothing, he said, voice slippery. Just paperwork. You shouldn't have worried. But standing there, watching my son hide behind lies and neon, I knew one thing for certain. The boy I raised was gone. That night, I drove back to the farm. The city lights faded in my rearview mirror, but Michael's fake smile stayed burned in my mind. I sat at the kitchen table, same table where he once spilled milk as a boy, same table where we ate soup when his mother was sick. Now it held nothing but that envelope. Debt. Lies. Betrayal. I stared at my hands. These hands built barns, carried my wife's coffin, held Michael when storms rattled the windows, and now they shook, not from age, but from anger. I asked myself, where did I go wrong? Was it when I let him leave the farm? When I paid his tuition? When I turned my head from the little lies, thinking he'd grow out of them? Out here in Nebraska, the wind howls at night. That night, it felt like judgment. It pressed against the windows, rattled the old walls, whispered what I didn't want to admit. My son wasn't lost. He chose this path, and I I was the fool who believed blood was stronger than greed. I poured a glass of whiskey, watched the amber light catch in the glass. It tasted bitter, not from the drink, but from the truth. For the first time, I felt it. Not just disappointment, not just fear, but something colder, a seed of revenge. A week later, I got a call. It was Frank Miller, an old friend from high school, now a loan officer at a bank in Omaha. His voice was low, heavy. "Tom, we need to talk. It's about Michael." I drove back into the city, parked outside the bank. Frank met me in his office, blinds half closed like he was hiding from the world. He slid a folder across the desk. Inside, documents, loan agreements, numbers higher than I ever dreamed possible. And there, at the bottom of the page, a signature. My name, Thomas Reed, but I hadn't signed it. I stared at the ink, every curve of the letters. It was my name, but not my hand. My son had forged me. He hadn't just borrowed money. He had stolen my name, my farm, my life's work, used as collateral without my consent. Frank cleared his throat. "Tom, I shouldn't be showing you this, but I thought you deserved to know. If the payments aren't made, the bank takes the land. The soil my father left me. The soil I swore would be Michael's one day. Now he had signed it away like it was nothing." I walked out of that bank with the folder pressed to my chest. The city noise felt distant. The ground beneath my boots felt strange, like it no longer belonged to me. That night, I didn't just feel betrayed, I felt robbed by my own blood. 2 nights later, headlights cut across my farmhouse. A black car rolled up the dirt road. 3 men stepped out. Dark coats, hard faces. They didn't look like neighbors. They didn't look like farmers. One knocked on my door, hard, fast, like he owned the place. "Mr. Reed," he said, voice sharp. "You owe money, big money. If you don't pay, you lose the farm." I stared at him, at his polished shoes sinking in Nebraska mud, at the way his eyes darted, rehearsed, not real. Behind him, one of the others shifted. I saw a tattoo on his neck. I'd seen that same tattoo years ago at a county fair. A local drunk who once tried to hustle kids for spare change. Actors, cheap actors. Michael had sent them. I didn't move, didn't flinch, just let the silence hang heavy in the doorway. Finally, I said, "If you boys are done playing tough, you should leave before the sheriff finds you." They exchanged looks. One muttered a curse. Then they backed away, climbed into their car, and disappeared down the road. I closed the door. The house creaked around me, old but honest. Unlike my son, that night, the last thread of doubt snapped. Michael wasn't just drowning. He was pulling me under with him. And I was done being his lifeline. The next morning, there was no car, no strangers, no threats. Just Michael, standing on my porch, alone. He looked smaller than I remembered. Suit wrinkled, eyes red, voice cracking. "Dad, please, I messed up. But I'm your son. You can't just walk away." He dropped to his knees right there on the wooden steps. The same steps he once ran up as a boy, carrying a fishing rod, yelling for dinner. Now his hands clutched my boots, hands that once held toy tractors, now shaking, desperate, stained by greed. "Just one more chance," he begged. "I swear I'll change. I'll fix everything. Just save me this time." I looked at him, at the boy I once carried on my shoulders, at the man who had forged my name, sent thugs to my door, and gambled away my land. The wind cut cold across the fields, but colder still was the silence between us. I wanted to believe him. God knows I wanted to. But his words felt rehearsed, like those men he'd hired to scare me. I pulled my boots free from his grip, stepped past him into the house. I didn't slam the door. I didn't shout. I just left him outside, kneeling, pleading, fading into the morning sun. And in that silence, I knew. My answer was final. 2 days later, I drove into Lincoln, not to the bank, not to the bar, to the office of my lawyer. The building was quiet, old bricks, stained glass on the door, the kind of place where truth is written in ink that lasts longer than blood. Mr. Harris had handled my papers for 30 years. He looked up when I entered. Tom, what brings you in? I placed the folder on his desk. The forged loans, the fake signature, the proof my son was no longer my son. I need a change, I said. My voice didn't shake, it didn't rise, it was steady, colder than the Nebraska wind. We went through the documents, line by line, name by name. And then, the moment came. The will. I told him to strike Michael's name, erase it, replace it with Emma, my granddaughter, and a scholarship fund for local kids who still believed in honest work. The pen scratched across the page. Final, irreversible. I leaned back in the chair. For the first time in weeks, my hands stopped shaking. It didn't feel like anger anymore. It felt like justice. Revenge wasn't a shout. It wasn't fire. It was ink. One line, one name erased. And with that stroke of a pen, Michael Reed no longer had a claim to my blood or my legacy. Word travels fast in small towns. By the end of the week, Michael was at my door again. But this time, he wasn't begging. He was raging. He shoved the screen door open, eyes wild, face red. Dad, how could you? You cut me out of the will? His voice shook the walls of the farmhouse. But I didn't move. I stood by the window, looking out at the fields. The same fields he had signed away. You're my father, he shouted. You can't erase me like that. I turned slowly, met his eyes, calm, cold. Blood doesn't mean loyalty, Michael. And loyalty doesn't mean lies. He froze, like the words hit harder than any fist could. For a second, I saw the boy he once was. The boy crying when he lost his dog. The boy who used to run across these fields barefoot. But that boy was gone. And in his place stood a man who had stolen my name, my land, my trust. Michael's voice cracked. You've destroyed me. I stepped closer. No, son. You destroyed yourself. I just put it in writing. The silence that followed was heavier than his anger. Finally, he stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. I stood alone in the quiet, and for the first time, I felt free. 2 weeks later, I called the family together. Not for a funeral, not for a holiday. For the truth. We gathered in my sister's dining room in Lincoln. Long oak table. Faces I had known my whole life. And at the far end, Michael. Silent. Tense. I stood with a folder in my hand. The same folder Frank had given me at the bank. I looked around the table. Family deserves honesty. Tonight, you'll see why I changed my will. I laid the papers down. Loan agreements, debt statements. And at the bottom, my name forged. Gasps filled the room. Chairs scraped. Eyes turned toward Michael. He tried to laugh. Tried to wave it off. Dad's old. He doesn't understand the paperwork. But then I pressed play on a small recorder. Michael's voice spilled out, clear, sharp. I signed his name. He'll never know. The farm will cover me. The room froze. No laughter now, only shame. I looked straight at him. You thought blood was a shield. Tonight, it's a mirror. Michael's face collapsed. Anger, then fear, then nothing. Finally, I said the words he never thought he'd hear. My land, my house, my legacy. None of it will ever be yours. My will belongs to Emma, and to those who still believe in honest work. The table erupted, whispers, gasps. Michael buried his face in his hands, and for the first time, I wasn't the one who looked small. The days after that dinner were quiet, too quiet. Word spread fast in Lincoln. Neighbors talked, cousins whispered, and Michael, he vanished from family circles. The bank came first. They seized his car, then the apartment. Friends stopped answering his calls. The city that once welcomed him with neon now swallowed him whole. I heard he was sleeping in motels, selling his suits, drinking more than he ever worked. And me? I stayed on the farm. Same porch, same fields, same silence. But the silence felt different. Not heavy, not suffocating. Free. I walked the land at dawn, boots pressing the soil my father left to me. For the first time in months, I felt it again. The earth beneath my feet was mine, safe, untouched by his greed. At night, I'd sit by the window, whiskey in hand, photo of my wife on the table. Her eyes seemed to ask, was it worth it? I whispered back, I lost a son, but I saved a legacy. And sometimes, that's the only revenge a father has left. The wind howled outside, but inside I felt steady, because revenge didn't just protect me, it protected the truth, and truth was heavier than blood. Revenge isn't always fire. It isn't fists. It isn't blood spilled in the dirt. Sometimes revenge is quieter, colder, written in silence, not shouted in rage. For me, it was a pen, a single stroke across a name, the erasure of a son who forgot what loyalty meant. Michael thought blood would save him, that family ties would cover every lie, but blood without honor is just red water, and water dries fast. I chose something heavier than anger, heavier than grief. I chose truth, the truth that my land was worth more than his debts, the truth that my name couldn't be forged without consequence, the truth that justice doesn't come with noise, but with finality. When I struck his name from the will, I didn't just protect my farm. I protected the memory of every honest man who came before me. My father, his father, all the way back to men who worked this soil with nothing but faith and calloused hands. And though I lost a son, I gained something colder, harder, stronger, a lesson carved into ink. Betrayal has a price. I sit here now, watching the Nebraska wind roll across the fields. The house creaks, the whiskey burns, but I feel steady, because revenge doesn't always fix the pain, but sometimes it stops the rot from spreading. I've told you my story, the story of a father, a son, and the silence that became revenge. But this isn't just about me. It's about anyone who has ever trusted blood and been betrayed. Maybe you know that feeling, the sting of a lie from someone you raised, the cold realization that family can wound deeper than any stranger. What would you have done in my place? Would you have forgiven? Would you have handed over the farm, the land, the legacy, just to keep the peace? Or would you have done what I did, taken the pen, drawn the line, and let justice speak in silence? I know my choice wasn't easy. I know it left scars, but I also know this. Revenge doesn't always look like rage. Sometimes it looks like survival. Now I ask you, have you ever faced a betrayal that cut this deep? Have you ever had to choose between family and truth? Tell me in the comments. Share your story. Because stories like these remind us we are not alone. And if you believe justice deserves a voice, if you believe truth should never be buried, subscribe. There are more stories the world tried to hide, and together we can make sure they're heard. This wasn't just my revenge, it was a warning, and maybe a mirror.